Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Time with Junebug. That's me. And it's hot in here. It says 75 in here. We don't have air, so it just does what it wants. And I'm downstairs. Upstairs it's pushing 80 something. Because it's 85-ish outside. So if I'm glistening, that's why. I have no control over my glistenings. But anyway, I just want to say in advance that this is going to be a longer one. I have 10.5 pages of notes I wrote down. So yeah, might be long. And this case might be a bit intense. So that's just like a content warning, trigger warning. It's sad. It's just sad, to put it lightly. But today we're going to talk about mainly Kathleen Folbig. Apparently it was a very big case, again around the time dealing with Lindy Chamberlain and the dingo got your baby situation. Because I learned about this case doing research for them. No animals are involved. Just want to throw that out there. No more dingoes or coyotes. No animals in this video. But apparently there was a time period, I'll go over at the end of the video, where moms were kind of going through some stuff. They were getting accused a lot more often. And I'll talk about it later. But today we're talking about Kathleen Folbig. I never heard of her. But again, this is an Australian case, so that could be why. And we're also going to talk about her 4 children. Now this takes place, like the crime, quote unquote, is between February of 1989 and February of 1999. Now the ages, I always say the ages in case it bothers anyone, and I do want to say it does vary, but they were all very young children, all under 2. So if that bothers you, I get it, you can leave, doesn't offend me. This story can get a bit heart-wrenching. And again, this takes place in Australia, and it is a solved case, at least, but it depends who you ask. I do want to note before we begin, there are several like mini documentaries I saw, like those like 20 to 30 minute ones on YouTube, and there's a bunch of like in-depth news clips. So as I said at the beginning, this will be cliff notes, but again, there's like 10.5 pages worth of cliff notes. So, sorry. So let's start with Kathleen Megan Folbig, or is it pronounced Nee Donovan? So she was born with the last name Donovan. And she was born June 14th of 1967 in Australia to Thomas John Taffy Britton and Kathleen May Donovan. So she was named after her mama, it seems. And oh boy, this poor lady has been through some shit. The Kathleen we're going to talk about. Not like her mom. Well, technically, yes, her mom. We'll get to it. But when Kathleen, little Kathleen, was about 1.5 years old, her dad murdered her mother by stabbing her 24 times. So, that's intense and unnecessary, I feel like. But the next day, thankfully, her dad was arrested. Good. And would go on to serve 15 years in prison before being sent back to England. And I don't know all the details about like what happened with this. Like I don't know if he just served 15 years, which I feel like is too light, or he served more time there, which I think he did. Like I don't know how his story ends. He doesn't deserve to have it told, and I didn't look into it. So now, due to her father brutally killing her mother, Kathleen became a ward of the state, and she was placed into foster care. Now, she was put into a couple's care and would stay with them a little over 1 year before being placed in a children's home in 1970. Now, 2 months later, it seems like Kathleen had an okay experience with the foster system, but maybe it drastically varies in Australia compared to here in the US. I don't know. But she was placed into a permanent foster care situation. And I looked it up, like, what's the difference between permanent foster care versus just straight up adoption? And you're basically just staying with that family until you age out of the foster care system. They're not legally adopting you, but it's like cheaper, quote unquote, option, like easier option, it seemed like, from what I saw. I didn't do a ton of research on the differences, but it's not adoption. But she stayed with them until she was of legal age. And Kathleen would stay with his family until she was a young adult, as I mentioned, but she would drop out of school at 15. And I don't know if she left the foster family at this time or because of this, or like the exact timeline surrounding this, but 5 years later, so when she's 20, in 1987, she would marry Craig Gibson Fulbig. So that's where the Fulbig comes from. And about 2 years later, their first child is born. Now, his name was Caleb Gibson Fulbig, and he was born February 1st of 1989. He was known to breathe loudly, it said, and was diagnosed with, I'm gonna butcher this, y'all. He was diagnosed with laryngomalacia, which is basically the upper larynx is curved / like collapsed and causes airway obstruction. I can try to put a picture I saw up if it helps. And it said that most babies tend to grow out of it, which is good. But he was otherwise like a perfectly healthy baby, minus his little breathing issues. However, 19 days later, so on February 20th, little Caleb would die in his sleep, and it was just the middle of the night. And it was thought to be SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome, which is just a horrible thing. Just death happens. It's just sudden infant death, which absolutely sucks. Now, this was obviously devastating to them. Who wouldn't it be devastating for? But they tried for another child, and their second child / second son was born June 3rd of 1990, and his name was Patrick Allen Fulbig. And again, Patrick seemed like a healthy baby boy, and this time, I believe, was the reason Craig would stay home with Kathleen for 3 months to give extra help with the baby, because I believe they were just being very cautious about SIDS in case it were to happen again. Because I saw there's so many random things that could maybe cause SIDS, or maybe it's just random, generally just random, but like the stuff with the crib, stuff with like positioning. So I believe he stayed home those 3 months with her to like, okay, we're gonna make sure this doesn't happen again. But unfortunately, on October 18th, Craig, the dad, woke up to Kathleen screaming over Patrick's crib where he was not breathing. He did CPR until the ambulance arrived, and Patrick survived, but was diagnosed with epilepsy and cortical blindness, which apparently I didn't want to write down what that meant. So maybe I can try to find a definition and put it up here, because my past self just didn't feel like it, I guess. So he survived, thankfully. But Kathleen would call Craig at work on February 18th, 1991, saying, quote, "It's happened again," end quote, because Patrick had died from a seizure. After their second loss, they moved to Thornton, New South Wales, and got pregnant shortly after. So their third child, and their first daughter, might I add, was born October 14th of 1992. Her name was Sarah Kathleen Fulbig, so another little Kathleen. And unfortunately, tragedy would strike again on August 29th of 1993, when Sarah would die from a respiratory tract infection. Maybe partial SIDS, I saw in some sources, and she was 10 months old, so almost a year. I told you the story would not be. Excuse you. I mentioned this case was intense, and it's not over yet, y'all. I'm sorry. If you need to check out because it's a lot, that's okay. Thanks for staying so long. But here we go. So in 1996, we're just chugging along. Kathleen is about 29-30. She has had her mother murdered. She's been a ward of the state. She dropped out of school at 15. and 3 of her babies have died by the time she's 30. That's a lot. That's a lot for anyone. I can't imagine, but before you're 30, all that's gone on in your life. But they moved to Singleton in New South Wales, just probably to get away from some memories or just needed to change. And a year later, on August 7th of 1997, their second daughter and their fourth and final child was born. And her name was Laura Elizabeth Fulbig. And things seemed to be going pretty well. Laura was their first child to actually make it to a year old and beyond. Because if you notice, each child lived a little bit longer than the previous, which is a horrible thing to say, but it's what happened. But then, as we could probably guess, based off the first half of this video, things would go south again when Laura would pass away on February 27th of 1999 from, myocarditis, which is basically, I saw, an inflammation of the heart. She was a year and a half old, their oldest baby to date. And I also noticed, as a side note, this means that 3 out of 4 of her children all died at the end of February. How hard, each quote unquote anniversary must be so hard, but just that tail end of February, like, has to be just brutal. Like, are you just taking those last 2 weeks off of February and just becoming a recluse? Like, it has to be so hard. Granted, I don't know for certain, I don't have children, so therefore I have not had a child pass. Now, if this isn't tragic enough for you, because I guessed it wasn't, Craig, remember Kathleen's husband, the baby daddy, he would read her personal diary or diaries and turn them over to the police as evidence that she actually murdered all of their children. And I do want to note, I found a lot of pics and examples from her diary that he found suspicious. There's too many quotes and stuff for me to write down, so I'm gonna just throw up some pictures. Hopefully you can read her handwriting, but I will read a couple of examples that they deemed as suspicious, especially Craig. Quote, "I think I am more patient with Laura. I take the time to figure out what is wrong now instead of just snapping my cog. She saved her life by being different." End quote. And another suspicious quote was, quote, "I'm going to call for help this time. I know that was the main reason for all my stress before, and stress made me do terrible things." End quote. So I could see how these might be seen as a bit like, what you talking about, Kathleen? So I can maybe see why he went to the police. I feel like you should have just asked your wife first, but whatever Craig's gonna do is what Craig's gonna do. So Craig would actually go to the police sometime between Laura's death, their final child, in the summer of 1999. Now, nothing seemed to really happen for a while, except the police, they got a search warrant for their home and found a few more journals that they took and read through. Because the next big thing that happened didn't happen until, well, let's back up. Nothing happened with the, police, but Craig and Kathleen separated in June of 2000, and Kathleen is about 33 at this time. She's gone through a lot in those 33 years, oh boy, oh boy. Now, I don't know, again, what was happening with, the legal side of things between summer 1999 and April 2001, because that's when Kathleen was arrested and charged with murder. It took them 2 years to arrest her, and she didn't go to trial until April 1st of 2003, which I know that's not always speedy, so I'm not surprised there. And her trial would last 7 weeks. Now, the main evidence, I say that with quotations, because there wasn't any. They just had her journals and what is known as Meadows' Law, which, remember at the beginning of the video when I said during this time period a lot of moms were getting in trouble or facing some wrath? It's because of this Meadows' Law. So basically, Meadows' Law in a nutshell is, quote, talking about infant deaths, quote, 1 is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder unless there is proof to the contrary, end quote. So basically saying there's no way someone could just have this tragic of a life. Like, they must have killed the children. So that was their evidence, journals and this, which is now not really used anymore. Now, the prosecution was saying Kathleen actually smothered all of her children during moments of like frustration, even though there was no evidence of this. Again, there was no physical evidence. It was literally just journals and Meadows law. Now, her defense would try and show all the ways she was in fact a caring mother, including journal entries where she was very concerned about her children and just putting the blame on herself. Like, did I drink too much orange juice when I was pregnant? Was there secondhand smoke? What could I have done differently to save my children? And she just thought she was like a bad mother. Then they would also bring witnesses to the stand and talk about how she also was a good mother. They would also, again, point out the lack that there's no physical evidence. And they also pointed out how the children actually died, which was the SIDS, the seizure, the myocarditis, just the reasons I listed earlier of why they died. Yeah, they brought those up. And I do want to note, they wouldn't try to like pin these deaths on Craig or anything. They were going with like the actual reason the children died. Now, in spite of this, on May 21st of 2003, Kathleen was found guilty. She was found guilty on 3 counts of murder, 1 count of manslaughter, and 1 count of maliciously inflicting grievous bodily harm. So on October 24th, 2003, she was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole until after 30 years had been served. And then she went to prison. That's basically it until on February 17th of 2005, when her sentence was reduced to 30 years and she could be eligible for parole after serving 25. This was due to an appeal that went through. And she's about 38 at this time. Again, we're gonna jump ahead. There's gonna be a lot of jumping from here on out, just so you know. So in 2011, an Australian legal academic, Emma Cunliffe, wrote a book called Murder, Medicine, and Motherhood. Now, this book was about Kathleen's innocence. The book received actually a lot of media attention, and due to this, in 2013, jumping ahead 2 years now, a team of lawyers took on her case. They enlisted several medical experts who pointed the cause of deaths, again, to the original causes, the SIDS, the epilepsy, those things, showing and saying that there's evidence to support why they said these were the children's cause of death. Patrick, when he died from a seizure, he had epilepsy, and there was no evidence to support that they died from being smothered. Now, a quote from the main medical expert enlisted, who was Stephen Cordner, quote, "There is no merit in forcing certainty where uncertainty exists. The very existence of the enigma of SIDS demonstrates how little we know about why some babies die," end quote. Which, that got me thinking, that's really true. It's literally called sudden infant death syndrome. And we as in the people, don't 100% know what causes it. So I think he makes a fair point. Now, jumping ahead again 2 years. In 2015, things moved slow in the legal system, if you couldn't tell. But in 2015, Kathleen's legal team delivered an official petition to the Attorney General's office in Sydney, Australia. And again, nothing seemed to happen until 3 years later, so August 22nd of 2018, when the Attorney General stated there would be an inquiry into the case. We're getting somewhere slowly but surely. So this time around, they did DNA testing in Kathleen and her children, and they found Kathleen had a strong mutation in her CALM2 gene, which helps, regulate the heart. They noted her mutation was so significant that it could lead to severe cardiac disorders and sudden death in infancy. I mean, that it sucks, but it's clearly pointing to what happened to her poor children. Now, I want to know, I didn't know what happened, like if they did anything with Craig's DNA, but I found later that he just refused to give them any. I don't understand the purpose of that. If he was like, for some reason worried he wasn't going to be the father or something, I don't know why he didn't do it. He just refused to give them DNA to help solve the death of his own children. So now her legal team would hand this 500-page document 500-page report to a former chief judge of the district court. His name was Reginald Blanche. And they're like, see, she's not guilty, she's innocent. But Mr. Reginald, well, he said he had no reason to think she wasn't guilty. And he's like, bye, she stays in prison. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. So that's frustrating. Again, we're gonna jump ahead again. So 2020 happened, we were there. It was not the bestest, but it slowed a lot of things down. It made the justice system even slower. But on March 4th of 2021, a petition signed by more than 100 like super eminent and like prominent scientists, and there was also medical and scientific explanations for the deaths, along with this petition, was published asking for the governor to pardon Kathleen. I don't know exactly where they published it. It just said it was published. Also, side notes, just some quick side notes to throw in. After the Judge Reginald said she was still guilty, her legal team called for a review on this decision, citing some bias, which I could see, but that appeal was rejected in March of 2021, which I think is rude. Also, in 2021, Kathleen was savagely beaten in prison by another inmate. January 1st of 2021 to be exact. What a great start to the new year. And normally she was, I saw, in protective custody due to her quote-unquote crimes, because we always hear that if you've done anything to children, you usually are not treated well in prison by other inmates. And that seemed to be the case for poor Kathleen. However, not dealing with her beating, that sucked. I mean, she survived, but however, on May 18th of 2022, this was still going, Attorney General Mark Speakman stated another inquiry into her case was to take place. I don't know if I'd have high hopes based off how the last one went, but it's better than nothing. So next, on June 5th, actually, of 2023, stuff was actually looking up for Kathleen because Governor Margaret Beasley, I believe it's pronounced Beasley, would pardon Kathleen. And she was released from prison that same day. So December 14th of 2023, a few months after she's been out, her convictions were overturned and she was no longer found guilty of killing her 4 children. But she was in prison for 20 years for this. Crimes she did not commit. Granted, I guess it depends who you ask. Some people do still believe she killed them, even though there's no physical evidence. But she was in prison for 20 years for crimes she did not commit. She loses her 4 children tragically and is thrown in prison for 20 years. She went in her mid-30s. She came out in her mid-50s. She missed some prime years. Granted, I personally think any years you're in prison when you're innocent is not good, but still. So let's talk about the aftermath, because that was a lot of information. I'm sorry, it jumped around a lot. Some things were happening at the same time. It's just, it's a lot. So Craig, because we haven't really talked about him since they separated, he did testify against her in the trial, as y'all probably assumed, because he's the one who turned her in a sense. He would actually remarry. I believe it was in 2005. So Kathleen's in prison, he gets remarried. And I believe they had a son together, I think. I'm not 100% certain. And then even after Kathleen was released and pardoned, he still firmly believed that she was the reason all 4 of their children died. And I don't think they ever spoke again. Apparently he was also, from an article I saw, that him and his team were frustrated and the wound was just getting reopened for him every time they tried to prove Kathleen was innocent. And I'm like, Like, you got to live your life. I'm not saying you losing your 4 children isn't horrible, because it is. But you got to remarry, have, I assume, another healthy baby. I think. I'm not 100% certain. And you got to live those 20 years. It just seems like the worst thing you had to endure was being inconvenienced that someone was trying to prove your ex-wife was innocent. Meanwhile, Kathleen's in prison for 20 years and getting beaten. Not all the time, just primarily that one time, but still. Out of the two of you, I definitely think Kathleen suffered more. But again, I don't know all the details of what Craig was up to, so, but he actually died this year, I saw, from a heart attack and cancer, so that is a double whammy. I'm sorry, Craig. It actually happened the beginning of March, like this year, so not that long ago. As for Kathleen, she hasn't been out that long, honestly. Maybe a year at the max, a little bit over a year. But she seems, from like an article or two I found, that she's enjoying the small things right now. Like, I saw she loves petting her friends, like horses and guinea pigs she has on her property, because I think she lives with one of her friends. She's enjoying like a comfortable bed. Her first meal when she got out was pizza and garlic bread, so she was really excited. And she got to have like a rum and Coke or a Kahlua and Coke. I'm not a drinker. She hasn't had an alcoholic drink in 20 years, which I could give or take, but when you're told you can't have something, it makes you want it more. And she got to like stir her tea with a spoon, so she was excited because she couldn't have like a metal spoon in prison. So she's just enjoying like normal people things, quote unquote. And I haven't seen a ton on her, but it's only been a year. She's probably just readjusting, enjoying like these small things, just trying to figure things out, maybe dealing with some extra legal stuff. I'm not entirely sure. But there are plenty of interviews I saw with her after she got out. I can maybe link a couple below. I don't think I'll obviously link them all, but I'll link some. And that, my sort of friends, was the unfortunate case of Kathleen Folbig and her poor little babies. I could sort of see how some of her diary entries would be suspicious. But again, if there's no other evidence to suggest it, and like, you knew she was already blaming herself, just like, if her just thinking she's not a good enough mother and that's why her babies are dying. Because I saw towards like, I don't know which child it was, that she started to think like this was karma, like a deity was punishing her. I can try to link that article if it lets me. I am out of my free, like, you get 3 free views of an article or something on a news page. I might be out of those, but I'll try to link it, where she thought like this was just punishment for being a bad mother. And that's why she said she was grateful that the latest, like the newest baby was different. It's like, oh, she's different, that means I can keep this one. And like terms like that. Which is just adds a whole extra layer of sadness. It's just, I thought this was so sad. You probably got my vibes. I do not think she's guilty. I feel like most people agree with that from what I saw. I would say like 75 to 90% of people think she is innocent. But then there's that like 25 to 10% that do side with Craig and say she did kill them, and now she's just on the list again. But let me know what you think, especially if you were alive and like maybe remembered this case. Do you think she's innocent, or do you think she legit killed her children? Again, I don't think she did, but everyone obviously has a different opinion. And obviously our opinions don't matter. It's up to the legal systems. Even if I thought she was innocent, that wouldn't get her out of prison. Anyway, sorry for the long video. I did warn you. And I don't know what I'm doing next. I think it will be significantly shorter, because super long videos back to back is just, it's a lot. But hope you all have a good day, and let me know what you think below. Bye, guys.